Some breaking news to bring you from Leicester Crown Court. It comes to us that the TikTok influencer Mahek Bukhari and her mother Ansreen Bukhari have both been found guilty of the murders.
Mum with me, like I said, leave it. You're not involved. You don't know what's going on. You just go straight on and leave it. I goes, okay, that's fine.
When the consequences of Ansreen's affair with a younger man came to light, TikTok influencer Mahek would do whatever it took to protect her mum, even if it meant murder. This is Red Rum, stories about the true victims of crime. Red Rum is researched using news archives, court documents, documentaries and social media content. This show is meant purely for educational and entertainment purposes and not meant to cause offence to anyone. The sources can be found in the show notes or on the website. The Skoda carrying Saqib and Hashim arrived at the Tesco car park in Leicester at 1:10 on the morning of February the 11th, 2022. Saqib, the passenger in the Skoda, saw the Audi TT parked in the middle of the car park. As the Skoda drove closer, it was clear that there were 4 people in the vehicle. He was likely alarmed because he was only expecting 2. There was also a Seat car hiding in the shadows by the stairwell. There were 4 people in it and they were wearing balaclavas. Hashim, the driver of the Skoda, immediately swung the steering wheel round and did a U-turn, exiting the car park quickly. This was a setup. The engine of the Seat roared to life and the lights turned on, and it followed closely behind the Skoda. The Skoda had to stop at a red light a little while ahead, and as it did, the Seat pulled up behind it. A witness report later stated that Hashim did look in the mirror to see if anyone would get out of the car behind him, but no one did. And so when the light turned green, he drove on and the Seat followed close behind. About 55 seconds later, the Audi approached that same light, which had by now turned red again, but it jumped the light and continued driving forward. All 3 vehicles headed towards the A46, a long road, a dual carriageway that heads towards Nottingham. It's a 70-mile-per-hour road. Now on the way there, Hashim circled around about twice, probably to see if anyone was following him, and the Seat was right behind him. Hashim continued towards the A46, picking up speed, and whilst he was doing this, Saqib had used his phone and had been calling someone and was shouting at them. At this point he disconnected the call and then he called 999. He told the operator, quote, "I'm being followed by 2 vehicles and they're trying to block me in. I can't get to a police station, I need help right now. There's guys following me, they've got balaclavas on." Now on the long straight A46, the Skoda accelerated. It was trying to get away from the Seat and the Audi, 60, 70, 80, then up to 90 miles per hour. Saqib was still on the phone to the police trying to describe what was happening. The operator heard him say, block 'em off, as the Audi tried to overtake the Skoda. All 3 cars were really close to each other now. The old Skoda just didn't have the power to shake off the 2 chasing vehicles. Given the recorded phone call, it was clear that Hashim was extremely scared. Quote, "They're literally right behind. And then there was a loud bang, and Saqib said they hit the back of the car. The Seat following them had hit the Skoda at 90 miles per hour. Saqib screamed, quote, "They're trying to ram me off the road. They're trying to kill me. I'm going to die. They're hitting the back of the car very fast. Please, I'm begging you. I'm going to die." And then the operator said that help was on the way. The impact that the Seat had with the back of the Skoda caused it to veer to one side of the road. The Skoda hit the central reservation barrier, went through, and then just behind it was a very sturdy, very large tree, and the car carried on moving at full speed. The next thing the operator heard was silence. The Skoda had carried on its trajectory and smashed into that tree and wrapped itself around it. The engine burst away from the bonnet and continued forward in a straight motion, landing meters away from the car. The 2 pursuing cars passed the wreckage that had just happened and just continued on driving. They didn't call for help, they didn't stop, they just continued forward. It was now around 1 a.m. and after the noise and the ferocity of the crash, after that there was an eerie silence. But then a spark ignited from the electrical system. then a flame, then a small fire, and then fierce burning engulfed the whole vehicle, getting hotter every minute until you could feel the temperature on the other side of the dual carriageway. Although it was dark, both sides of the dual carriageway were lit up from the force of the fire. A recovery driver on his way home to Nottingham noticed debris on the road. He then saw the vehicle ahead of him that was burst into flames, and at this point he assumed that there was no one inside. He couldn't bring himself to think anything other than that, and so he made the decision to block off the road and call emergency services. Emergency services were already on their way. The fire by this point could be seen from a long way away. Now at this time, on the other side of the road travelling back towards Leicester were the two cars that were earlier involved in that chase. Both cars drove past the burning wreckage, driving slowly, trying not to draw any attention to themselves. Because of the intensity of the fire, the Skoda couldn't be safely reached, and so fire services had to extinguish the fire first, and then as they got closer, they saw a body hanging out of the passenger side door. And finally, when they managed to extinguish the fire completely, they came across another body, this time in the driver's seat. Saqib had died from blood loss and Hashim had died from head injuries. Both men were just 21 years old. The single vehicle crash seemed at first to onlookers to be just a tragic road accident. No one had stopped at the scene that had witnessed the actual crash and so couldn't give any details as to what had happened. But the public didn't know what the police had, and that was the 999 call from Saqib just moments before the fatal crash. As the bodies were removed from the crash site that morning, the investigation was already well underway and arrests would be being made any minute. Through mobile phone data, vehicle tracking information, CCTV footage, and internet information, the police began to gradually discover what had happened. This wasn't just a hit and run, this was a chain of events that went back 3 years. Ansreen, 46-year-old married mother of two, was one of the passengers in the chasing Audi. She had started an on-off affair with Saqib in 2020. Saqib worked in a bakery and also helped his father, who was a delivery driver and lived in Banbury. His affair with Ansreen was passionate, and he later told his friends that he was in love with her. Saqib knew Ansreen's daughter, Mahek, who was also a passenger in the Audi. In May 2021, Saqib, Ansreen, Mahek, and two of Mahek's cousins arrived at a 2-day party together at a bungalow in Banbury. Saqib and Ansreen were hugging, kissing and holding hands. They were also seen going into a bedroom together. In December of 2021, Saqib booked a hotel room and took Ansreen to London. From August 2021 until February 2022, Saqib contacted Ansreen 1,702 times. She contacted him 214 times. He was a young man infatuated. Saqib's sister said that he was head over heels and that he loved her so much. But by January 2022, Ansreen had decided to end the affair. Things were getting too much, they were getting too serious, and she didn't want to ruin her marriage. If the affair ever became publicly known, Ansreen's marriage would be destroyed, as would her reputation and her daughter's relationship with her father. Saqib was devastated when Ansreen told him that she wanted to end it. She was the love of his life, but as far as she was concerned, he was just someone she was having an affair with. Saqib, desperate to get back with Ansreen, sent her Instagram messages almost daily, but she just didn't reply. He asked Ansreen to call him, but she never did, and he would later message her saying that he was going to do something to himself. These messages continued and he told her how much he missed her, and she replied with, "Okay, calm down." During the course of their relationship, the course of the affair, Saqib and Ansreen had taken photos, and in these photos, Ansreen was in compromising positions, and it was very evident from the photos that there had been a sexual affair. With Ansreen adamant that she didn't want to continue the relationship, Saqib was angry and he told her that he didn't give a f***. He was going to do what he needed to do. When he was angry, he said he was angry. He then sent her a picture of her topless and said that he would send it to her family. Saqib messaged again saying that he and his friends were going to go and visit her family in Stoke. This was getting out of hand for Ansreen. If her husband was there when Saqib arrived, then everything would be revealed and she couldn't let that happen. Ansreen told him, "I'm calling the police." which of course she didn't, because then it would have been revealed to the world what she'd been doing. Instead, she confided in Mehek, her daughter, and she told her what had been going on and said she needed her help, and Mehek was determined to do whatever it took to protect her mother. At some point, Saqib's mind turned to all of the money that he had spent on the affair with Ansarine, all of that money he'd spent on trips to London, taking her out, and he said that it amounted to around £3,000, and he told Ansarine he wanted that money back. Because Ansarine wasn't answering any of Saqib's messages, he took to messaging Mehek, her daughter, and he told Mehek that if he didn't get this £3,000, he was going to send those photos to Mehek's dad, Ansarine's husband. He said if she just sent the £3,000 to his bank account, he would go to Pakistan and she would never hear from him again. But of course the money was never sent, and so he then messaged Mehek again saying, quote, "I want you to get your mum to call me one last time." He also messaged Ansarine saying, quote, "Don't force me into something stupid, Ansarine. I can break up your marriage, but I'm waiting for you to call me." Mehek, or Maybe Vlogs, as she was known to her followers, lived with her mum and dad in Stoke-on-Trent. The 22-year-old was a social media star and influencer, and her TikTok account had over 126,000 followers and included videos of Mehek, Ansarine and friends. Her YouTube channel, Maybe Vlogs, had more than 3,700 subscribers, and she'd share fashion, style and entertainment content. Mehek had over 43,000 followers on Instagram, and she used her account to promote fashion items and beauty products, and she'd made a good income from doing this. Any revelation about this affair that her mum had had with Saqib could potentially ruin that for her, and it could stop this form of income, and so she decided to do something about it. She messaged Saqib saying that she would get him the money. Of course, she never intended on doing this, and at the same time she told her mum that she would get people to jump him so that he wouldn't even know what day it was. One of those guys was a man called Rakan Karwan. He was a fellow YouTuber and a friend of Mehek's. Mehek told Rakan what was going on, and he actually took over communication and took the phone and was messaging Saqib. He said Saqib should text him from now on and leave Mehek and her mum Ansarine alone. Reis Jamal was another one of Mehek's friends. He was told about the Saqib problem and started to recruit others to help solve this problem. This included Natasha Akhtar, who had been the person who'd provided the Seat that was driven in the car chase. Rakan, Reis and Mehek all started to talk about what they should do to solve this problem. Even if they paid Saqib off, he would still have a phone full of photos and videos of the pictures of Mehek's mum, and so they devised a plan that would involve actually stealing the phone off of Saqib so that the pictures and photos would only be with them and Saqib wouldn't have access to them anymore. On the 9th of February, Saqib managed to get through to Ansarine on the phone, and Saqib's sister heard the conversation. He'd put the phone on loudspeaker, and she overheard him telling Ansarine how much he loved her and that he didn't blame her for the split up. Ansarine told Saqib that she would pay him the money, but he'd have to collect it from someone else. It was going to be someone that she knew, a boy, she described him as. And she said that he would be waiting in Tesco car park in Leicester, and Saqib would have to go there and collect the money himself. After this call, Saqib's sister told him that this could all be a setup and she didn't want him to go, but Saqib laughed it off and then headed outside. At 11 minutes past 8 on the 10th of February, Saqib sent another message threatening that he would go to the Bukhari home if he needed to. And as far as Mehek was concerned, now was time to enact the plan. Reis, Raken and Mehek recruited 5 other people to help them with their plan. At 8:49 p.m. that night, Mehek messaged Saqib and she told him that she had the money and to come and meet in a car park in Loughborough, and then she later changed that to a car park in Leicester. Saqib didn't have a driving licence, and so he messaged his friend Hashim, a long-term friend of his, and asked if he'd take him, and Hashim agreed. At around 11 p.m. that night, Saqib and Hashim left and they headed to Leicester, and at around that same time, Mehek and her mum Ansarine were also leaving their house in Stoke and heading to that same car park. One person that they'd asked to help them was a woman called Natasha Akhtar. I've seen it reported in some places that she was a law student and she was living in Birmingham, and so she left her house and headed to Leicester. Meanwhile, there were a flurry of phone calls between everyone else involved. Altogether, there were 8 people, and the idea was that they all needed to be in that Leicester car park before Saqib arrived. All 8 people were spread between 2 cars. One was an Audi and one was a Seat, and those 2 cars did arrive in the Tesco car park minutes before Saqib and Hashim arrived. The 2 cars parked side by side with their windows open so that they could talk to each other, and they spoke about what they were going to do next. Rakan was driving the Audi and Rais was driving the Seat, and Mahek and her mum were also in the Audi. The car was Mahek's, and this particular car wasn't one she usually owned. Hers was in for repair, and so this particular car was a high-spec Audi, and I'll come back to why that's important a bit later. The Seat then drove over to a darkened area of the car park and lay in wait. The plan was that Saqib would drive in and hopefully not see that Seat so that they could then ambush him. If he saw the Seat ahead of time, he would know it was a setup and he would just drive off. Saqib and Hashim had arrived into Leicester at about 12:45 a.m, but they'd gone to the wrong Tesco. After a phone call to Mahek, Saqib and Hashim drove to the right Tesco. The Skoda entered that car park and there was a flurry of phone calls between the passengers in the Seat and the passengers in the Audi. Saqib saw something in the darkness and shouted at Hashim to stop. It was clear they had both seen the Audi in the middle of the car park, but instead of just Mahek and Ansreen, there were 2 other people in it. That wasn't what was agreed. Saqib also saw something else. Hidden in the shadows of the stairwell was another vehicle. There were 4 people in it, and they were wearing balaclavas. Hashim turned the car around and headed for the exit, and at that same time, Rakan turned the Audi around and headed after them straight away. As they travelled along the A46, the eventual site of the crash, Saqib disconnected from Mahek and called the police describing what was happening, staying on the line until the operator heard the terrible crashing noise and the line went dead. With the Skoda in flames and wrapped around the tree, the 2 cars that had been chasing parked up a little while up the road, and they got out and discussed what they should do next. That's when they decided to drive slowly back towards Leicester, and that's when they could see the fiery blaze on that side of the road as they drove past it. They arrived back in Leicester and all 8 of them left the vehicles, with most returning to their respective homes. Mahek and Ansreen returned to their home in Stoke, but even as they were just leaving Leicester, the investigation was already well underway and the police had that 999 call. Natasha Akhtar was the first person to be arrested. The blue Seat she was now driving home was being hunted by police within about 3 hours of the fatal crash. She was seen by police heading towards Birmingham, and other police cars went to help, and Natasha was blocked by police vehicles at 4:45 a.m. She was arrested on suspicion of murder and taken to a Birmingham police station. Police officers had driven past Ansreen and Mahek's house and seen an Audi sat outside, and they were pretty sure that was the car that was involved in the chase, and so they called for backup. When backup arrived, they went up to the front door, knocked on, and they were allowed inside. They had initially spoken to Ansreen's husband at the door. Now, as this happened, Mahek messaged Ansreen telling her that if the police asked who was in the Audi, she should say it was just the pair of them, and to confirm both were out of the house during the night in the Audi and had gone to Nottingham. Ansreen immediately started deleting as many of the incriminating messages on her phone as she could. At 9:30 a.m, both Mahek and Ansreen were arrested for murder. Rakan and Rais weren't actually arrested immediately, and instead they'd gone to a phone shop that had been opened specially for them, and they had switched out their phones for different ones. And then just a day later, they actually turned themselves into police. Meanwhile, police were questioning both Mahek and Ansreen in separate interrogation rooms. As they were doing this, they realised they weren't going to get a whole lot from Ansreen. In fact, the only thing she would answer to all of their questions was no comment. Mahek, however, did talk, although not to tell police the truth. Mahek said that she was heading to Nottingham with her mum that night. She said the diversion sent her via Leicester, and while she was there, she posted on the internet that she was in Leicester, and it was seen by Saqib, who she described as someone she'd only met once. Quote, "This person was harassing me, bullying me. He He would upload on Instagram my phone number, my email address. Mahek said that Saqib had been editing Mahek's face onto photos of other women, all because she was ignoring him, and she went on to say that he was doing the same with her mum's pictures. Quote, "This person is a stalker." She said people knew who she was, and often when she went out at restaurants, her car was damaged or the tyres slashed. She said, quote, "I won't go to the police because at the end of the day, it's always going to happen to me." Mahek told police that the events of that night were that Saqib messaged her telling her he knew she was in Leicester, and she replied, "Please, can you leave me alone?" She said that she then asked if she could meet him in a lit car park, and he said no, and then he went on to say that he would only leave her alone if she gave him £3,000. She said she refused to give Saqib the money, but said that she would still meet up with him in that Tesco car park, but she said he never showed up. One of the detectives asked Mahek about that Tesco meeting. They asked why on earth she would meet up with him if she was so scared of him, and she said that he'd already asked for £2,000 and she wanted to sort this out face to face. The detectives then challenged Mahek on her claims that she hadn't seen any other vehicles in the Tesco car park. They had CCTV from this car park, and so they showed it to her. The first CCTV footage showed the Audi and the Seat arriving pretty much at the same time, stopping, having a chat, and then minutes later, Saqib and Hashim arriving in their car. But Mahek continued saying she didn't see anybody. The detective said, quote, "We've got you." She went on to admit that she must have seen the Seat, but she didn't remember, and added that she did not see any other cars. The detective asked then if it was just a coincidence she had been in the same car park as two other cars that were involved in a very, very horrible crash just minutes later. Mahek continued to claim that because Saqib had never come into that car park, her and her mum just went back to Nottingham. She said a Seat had overtaken her car at around 60 miles an hour, and then another car had come down the middle, a silver one, which was the Skoda that Hashim and Saqib were in, and she said they were very close together. She asked her mum what was going on. She said she drove past the cars and then she heard a loud bang.
With me, like I said, leave it. You're not involved. You don't know what's going on. You just go straight on and leave it. I goes, okay, that's fine.
Quote, "My leg was shaking. I couldn't drive." She said she pulled over and decided she did not want to go to Nottingham. Quote, "I was hoping this silver car was okay." She claimed she didn't know the silver car contained Saqib because Saqib had told her on the phone that he would be in a Mercedes. As she headed back down the A46, she said she did see the flames and the car wreckage, but she decided not to report it because ambulances were already there. Mahek was shown even more CCTV footage of her car and the other two cars all stopped at a red light together, but she said she just didn't remember, saying that she didn't take in every car that went past her. She was asked, "He lives in Oxfordshire, you live in Stoke. Was it just a coincidence that you were both on the same road at the same time?" She then was asked if she was in contact with the driver of the Seat, Rais, and she said no, she wasn't, but her phone records showed that he tried to call her a number of times the morning after the crash. When asked why he was trying to call her and also why he'd sent a message, Mahek just replied that she didn't know. Loads of people tried to call her and she couldn't control what they did. This woman is not smart. That might be unfair, I don't know her level of intelligence, but she certainly doesn't know how an investigation works and how evidence works. She said that she would see Rais once in a blue moon and that he had just happened to call her on the morning of the crash. She said she hadn't seen him since she was about 18 or 19 years old. She added that while she was on the phone to him, they were just chatting and she didn't even realise that the police were downstairs waiting for her. As for Rakan, the guy who had been driving the Audi, Mahek said that he was a fellow YouTuber and she hadn't seen him since 2021. Police pointed to phone records that showed that she'd been on the phone to him at the exact time of the crash, but she said she doesn't know, she wouldn't remember, and that so much has happened. Forensics were conducted on the Seat and found that near the front registration plate there was an impression in the front bumper which had removed some of the paint. They also found the fog light on the front bumper was out of place and you could clearly see damage that almost aligned with the Skoda's rear bumper. The case did go to trial, and although the first one had to be cut short because of jury irregularities, the second one went ahead in summer of 2023. On trial were Natasha Akhtar, Ansreen Bukhari, Mahek Bukhari, Rais Jamal, Rakan Karwan, Sanaf Ghulam Mustafa, Amir Jamal, and another person who was on trial but was acquitted. Each of the defendants faced 2 counts of murder, and all of them denied murder. The prosecution pointed out that the 999 call that Saqib had made was of crucial importance into determining that this crash was intentional. The jury was shown phone location data, CCTV, ANPR and social media messages. And on top of this, they were shown tracking data from the Audi. Earlier I mentioned that it was a high-spec Audi, and this is important because it was on loan to Mahek, and it showed exactly the speed, exactly the time, and exactly the location of where she was travelling. It showed that the Audi was doing 100 miles an hour immediately before the crash and braked hard immediately after the crash. The phone evidence showed that while Saqib had dialed 999 and was talking to 999 in the car just before the crash, there was an ongoing call between the people in the Audi car and the people in the Seat, and that phone call continued even after the crash. During the trial, Mahek was asked if she had a good relationship with her mum, to which she answered yes. Her mum told her everything. She was then asked if her mum had an affair with other men, and she said no, and that her mum loved her dad. She stuck largely to the story that she told police in the first place, except for when the evidence pointed another way, in which case she would just change her story. Also during the trial, a phone call was presented that was made by Natasha Akhtar when she was on remand, and that was a phone call to her mum where she said, quote, "I was part of it, I could not get out of it at all. I will get a few years, I know that." And then her mum tells her not to say anything to the police. The prosecutor went on to say that Rais must have known that severe injury or death would be caused given the chase that was happening. Quote, "They were all parties to a plan to cause at least serious harm to Saqib if that was necessary to retrieve what they believed was on his phone." The jury took 28 hours to come to their conclusion and verdict on all 8 defendants. 1 defendant was found not guilty. Natasha Akhtar, Sanaf Ghulam Mustafa and Amir Jamal were found not guilty of murder. They were found guilty of manslaughter. Natasha got 12 years and Sanaf and Amir got 15 years. Ansreen Bukhari, Mahek Bukhari, Rais Jamal and Rakan Karwan were found guilty of the murders of Saqib and Hashim. The judge told Ansreen that she was the grown-up adult of this group and that she should have acted that way. "It was the reason you, Ansreen Bukhari, became your daughter's chaperone, but your head was turned towards the perceived glamour, far removed from the life you had lived until then as a mother and a housewife in Stoke-on-Trent." Ansreen was sentenced to a minimum of 27 years, which means she'd be 73 years old before she's even considered for parole. Rakan, the driver of the Audi, was given a minimum of 27 years imprisonment. Then it was Mahek's turn for sentencing. The judge described how Mahek and Ansreen caused a deadly maelstrom. TikTok and Instagram lie at the heart of this case. You, Mahek Bukhari, being an influencer on both platforms. That was the reason you dropped out of university. Had you not done so, you would be a young graduate with a whole life ahead of you. But now you confine yourself to prison for all of your best years. The judge described the TikTok influencer as self-obsessed with an exaggerated sense of entitlement. He said, "You are oblivious to the damage you do." Mahek was sentenced to 31 years and 8 months in prison. 24-year-old Mahek Bukhari will be 56 years old before she's even considered for parole. Finally, Rais, the driver of the car that rammed the Skoda, got a minimum of 36 years. Hashim's mum still calls his phone every single day, and she'll still lay a place at the table for him when they eat together as a family. She said, quote, "I should have protected you and kept you safe. Every day I struggle living in this world without you." Hashim's dad asked if it was all worth it. Quote, "You all made the decision to scare, harm, hurt my son, and you made the decision not to let them escape that night when they fled in fear." Hashim was innocent, totally innocent. He drove his friend that night not knowing that he was driving to his death. The fear that he felt in those minutes being chased and then rammed off the road. They left Hashim and his friend to burn in a furnace of hell. They didn't just take 2 lives that night, they took ours too. We've had people harass, abuse and threaten us, as well as death threats. Saqib's dad described, "The joy Saqib brought into our lives is immeasurable. Saqib's beautiful presence was a gift. He brought light into the lives of everyone who knew him. His smile would light up any room, and he had a contagious laugh. He was kind-hearted and selfless, always putting others before himself. This is Red Rum. Thank you so much for watching this episode. If you enjoyed it, please click the thumbs up button. And thank you so much to our guest writer for their help with this episode. It is a case that has literally just been concluded. The sentencing happened last week. So the work that the guest writer's done on that is amazing. So thank you so much. I'll see you next week for another episode of Red Rum. Bye.